All right, church family, go ahead and gather back up. It's good to hear that conversation, but there's a very important video that I want you to get to hear all of, so watch this video as we start our time of sermon. Watch this.
Good morning, Westover. Today we have the honor to hear from Dusty Breeding. It is a big day for us because we get to hear from Dusty preaching today. Last week was a big week for the Breeding family as Dusty and Cecily brought to Westover for the very first time their daughter, Lulu. And so we're excited last week Lulu came to church, and we're excited this week that you came to church because you get to hear from Dusty. So without further ado, would y'all join me in giving Dusty a warm Westover welcome? Thanks.
Sometimes we choose our challenges. This July, my wife, Cecily, and I will be married for 15 years. We celebrate our 15th anniversary. And early on in our marriage, we decided that we would take turns picking the family vacation. One year she picks, and then the next year I would pick. Well, recently we were reflecting on some of those trips, and we were trying to decide what is our favorite trip. What's our favorite family vacation that we've ever been on? And so we started running through the various trips. Was it camping in Central California? Was it one of the cruises or an island or something like that? But none of those were the pick. Instead, we settled on a trip that Cecily had selected for us, which was to climb Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. Now, something that you might not know about us is that if I'm selecting the vacation, we're probably staying at exquisite hotels, we're probably eating great food, we're probably enjoying a beautiful city, maybe a sunset over the ocean. If Cecily is choosing the vacation, I don't know what it will be, but I know it's going to be painful and there's going to be some suffering. I'll probably be injured by the end of it. And that is the story of this trip. So Cecily selected for us to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. Kilimanjaro, that's my daughter right now, crying. Kilimanjaro is the tallest freestanding mountain in the world. It's located in East Africa in Tanzania. It's not a part of a mountain chain like the Rockies, but instead it's a volcano or a former volcano that just kind of rises up out of the desert. So it's this awe-inspiring sight. Now, I did not know this at the time because my wife didn't tell me this, but there are multiple routes that you can take to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. One route has a 93% success rate, meaning 93% of the people who attempt to climb it make it to the top. That is a 7-day trip. There's also a 5-day trip that has a 50% success rate, so 50% of the people who attempt fail. Guess which route my wife wanted us to take on this trip? She didn't even tell me that there was a 7-day trip. We were definitely doing the 5-day trip. So on day one, you started about 6,000 feet, which is the starting point. And then by the end of day one, you go up to around 9,000 feet. Day two, you go from 9 to 12. And then day three is where the push starts to become difficult because you start the day by going from about 12,000 feet to 15,000 feet, which is base camp. You try to grab a quick, brief rest, try to get some sleep, get some food, because around midnight, you wake up and you attempt to push to the summit. Now, if you have done any mountaineering or climbing, you know that ideally you want to get to the top of the mountain by sunrise. It's beautiful, photos are great, but also, typically speaking, bad weather comes in later in the morning or into the afternoon. So the ideal is that you summit at or before sunrise. Didn't happen for us. We didn't make it. By sunrise, on our way up throughout the night, I realized that I was developing altitude sickness. I'm a really good Enneagram 6, which means in my bad days, I worry and strategize and think of all the possible things that could go wrong. And I had done the reading, and I knew that altitude sickness was a thing. Statistically impacts men more than women, interestingly. Something about us being a little more boneheaded and not being willing to rest or break. So as we're going up the mountain, I started to feel sick. we did summit. I think we have a photo of us making it to the top of the mountain. Around 11 a.m., Cecily and I summited Kilimanjaro, 19,341 feet. We made it. What the photo doesn't capture is what happened immediately after the photo was taken, which was me violently vomiting all over the top of the tallest freestanding mountain in the world, Kilimanjaro. I had developed a serious case of altitude sickness. I was so sick, I could barely stand. Cecily was trying to hold me up, and we had some guides who were assisting as well. And we spent the next 6 hours descending the mountain, more like me tumbling and rolling down the mountain. My pants were torn. There's vomit left all over the mountain. It was a terrible experience. I got to the bottom. I was so mad at Cecily. I said, "You're never picking another trip. This was a terrible idea. I hated this. I didn't even want to do this. This was your idea. We're never climbing another mountain again." Fast forward a few years later, and now as we reflect back on that trip, we both agree that's our favorite vacation we've ever taken together. We love a challenge, and I don't think we're the only crazy ones. There are some new trends happening in the world. One of them is High Rocks. I've got a photo up here. I don't know if any of y'all have heard of High Rocks. It's a fitness event where you run for 5 or 6 miles, and you do hundreds of burpees, and you push a sled, or maybe you've done a Spartan race. Spartan race, you're crawling through mud, you're going under barbed wire, you're doing burpees, you might get some skin infection from being in the dirty mud. And we pay for this, by the way, right? Like we pay for the privilege of suffering and experiencing these challenges. Or something that is relatively new in recent years is cold plunging. Do we have any cold plungers? Anyone who likes to get in an ice bath? I see some here. Yeah. So this is a thing. People like to fill a freezer or some sort of tub with ice and water and then get in it, right? And they say that that's fun and apparently is good for you and is healthy for your body. Sometimes we choose the challenge. But sometimes the challenge chooses us. In March of 2021, I received a phone call from my mom. She said, "Dusty, your dad's having a heart attack." I got on a flight, I flew home to Indiana, and I was able to hold the hand of my dying father as he spent the last few days on earth. Some of you have likely lost loved ones. You may be wrestling or battling some sort of sickness or illness. You might be dealing with depression, anxiety, maybe job loss or brokenness in your family. Sometimes the challenge chooses us. And today we're going to take some time to consider how we respond when those challenges choose us. As Luke mentioned, my name is Dusty Breeding. My wife Cecily and I relocated from Los Angeles about a year ago to Austin. We are the Californians who moved to Texas. I'm not sorry about that because we love Austin. We are loving it here. We've loved our time in Texas and feel so welcomed here by the state, but also by you all here at Westover. And we haven't been at church for the last 4 or 5 weeks. We've been a little busy. I think I've got a photo of what being busy looks like for us these days. This is Lulu. She was born 7 weeks ago yesterday, and she has some we've had a really great time bringing her into our family. But it's good to be back at church. We took some time off because we knew that we would bring her and she would be hugged on and kissed on by y'all. She would get lots of love and maybe some germs, so we thought, let's wait a little while. So it's good to be back. Last Sunday was our first Sunday back. This month, Westover has been walking through the book of Proverbs, and I'm so excited to be able to preach from Proverbs because it's actually one of my favorite books of the Bible. And one of the reasons that it's one of my favorite books is because it is one of the only books in the Bible that it's totally appropriate to open up, lay on your coffee table, and select a verse and just read that verse and think about what it means for your day, what it means for your life. And I point that out because I think one of the biggest mistakes that I think we've made in Christendom is to take all of the different types of writings and all the different types of books that we find in the Bible and put them between two covers. I've got an image of how I often think we subconsciously think the Bible exists. I think it's the one before this of Jesus holding a Bible, right? So I think we often think like, oh yeah, this is like Jesus for sure had a Bible, right? Like we are so connected to our Bible, which is a good thing, except the Bible is not just one book. It's actually a collection of multiple different texts, about 66 different types of, or a collection of 66 different writings that fall into different genres. So if you go to the next slide, you can see theologians say there's around 6 to 10 different genres or styles of writing within the Bible. We have things like law books, similar to like our Constitution. We have the Gospels that operate more like biographies. And we have letters that are intended for a specific audience. And so all of those types of books and letters require pretty serious reflection on the context and who this was really written to for us to fully understand what that text means to our life. But Proverbs, by design, is different. Proverbs is wisdom literature. In fact, in a Jewish worship service, their liturgy does not contain the book of Proverbs. They use Proverbs in their home for teaching with their children. They used it for personal reflection and growth. But what's great about Proverbs is you can open it up and you can grab a verse and just really think, what is this saying to me today? What does this mean? What wisdom exists in this text? And that's what we're going to do today. I've selected a proverb for us to sit with that I think is relevant to our current context. So if you would, please stand with me for the reading of our passage today. Proverbs 3:5-6 says this: "Trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." The word of the Lord. You may be seated. Now, I mentioned that Cecily and I love to hike. We've done some really cool hikes, long-distance hikes, and if you've ever done a long-distance hike, you may have come across something that looks like this. This is a cairn. A cairn is a stack of rocks. It's a pile of rocks. You may have seen this at the beach, but on a long-distance trail, you may come across one of these. And in good weather, you may think, oh, cool, somebody stacked up a bunch of rocks. But in bad weather, the next slide you'll see when there's dense fog, or if there's a whiteout conditions, or if you're above tree line on a mountain where you can't find a discernible path, a cairn actually plays a role that is necessary for your survival. It's a physical object that manifests as a guide along the path. Proverbs 3:5-6 helps us understand the role that God plays as a cairn in the midst of the challenges we face. Let me break this text down a little bit for you. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understanding. If you explored in the Hebrew language what this text is saying, a better, more full understanding of the phrase leaning on your own understanding is that on your own understanding there is nothing. Your own understanding is empty, right? The text is telling us if you're trying to use your logic or your great wisdom or your rational mind, there's actually nothing there. And the picture that I think it paints is kind of like if you've ever tried to lean on a chair that's not there, right? You missed the chair. That's this image. It's like if you're leaning on your understanding, it's totally empty. There's actually nothing to lean on. The next segment of the text says, in all of your ways, submit to him. The Hebrew word here for submit is yada. Yada in English is to know, to be in union with. In other passages in the Old Testament, it's actually used describing the sexual union that occurs between a husband and wife as they become one. And so the connotation here is that we should be in union with God. We should be one with God. We submit our ways to him by being in the presence of God. The last segment of the text says this, and he will make your paths straight. In Hebrew, it's literally saying he will make your path plain. He will make your path clear. He will make your path known. It's not saying straight, no turns, no curves, no ups and downs. It's not saying there won't be bumps. He's not saying there won't be serious problems. He's not saying there won't be challenges to be faced. But instead, if you don't rely on your great wisdom, if you instead trust in God, if you're with the presence of God, he will make your path clear. You will know how to handle whatever it is that you are facing. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 lays out that in the midst of adversity, the presence of God is worthy of leaning on. And in that way, God's presence is a cairn that helps us navigate through challenge. And I think there's possibly no better example of this idea of God's presence being a cairn, being physically present in our life, than in the story of the Exodus. One of the central characters in the story of Exodus is not just God, but it's the presence of God. In theology circles, we call this a moment of theophany. Theophany is when when God takes on some sort of physical presence that we could see or experience. It's a moment of theophany. It's a cairn when God is present with us. And throughout the text of Exodus, you'll see God interacting with people. We see God even providing manna from heaven, but that's different than a moment of theophany. A moment of theophany is when we feel and see God's presence being with us. And today we're going to explore 5 moments in the story of Exodus. And just to give you a little bit of background, I'm sure you're all familiar with the Exodus, but kind of looping you into the story, the text or the story actually begins in Genesis when God tells Abraham that he's going to make his descendants numerous. Well, as those descendants become numerous, Pharaoh starts to notice, starting to see this tribe of people growing in size and strength, so Pharaoh decides to enslave the Israelites. That is when God raises up Moses, and Moses is called to lead his people out of slavery and into the promised land. That's the overarching story. But today I want to take time to examine these 5 moments of theophany. The first time we see theophany actually occurs in the presence of God showing up in Exodus in the burning bush. So I'll read this text for you. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt, but I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. This last line, I will be with you, is the introduction of this idea of theophany throughout the text of Exodus. It's God saying, Moses, you don't have to worry about your great skills or your knowledge or leaning on your own understanding, but instead, I will be with you. And that is the affirmation of God through theophany. And we will see this throughout the text, the divine presence of God showing up in our physical world. It's God being a cairn on the path of the Israelites through the Exodus. Chronologically, the second time that we see God showing up in some sort of physical form or a moment of theophany actually occurs during the last plague. And this is actually a text that when I was preparing this sermon, I actually thought about skipping over this or leaving it out because it's complex to understand. It's hard for me to maybe fully rationalize or make sense of, and it's because it's relatively brutal. Let me read this text. On that same night, I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals, and I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. This is the day you are to commemorate. For the generations to come, you shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance. In this moment of theophany, we see the presence of God taking the life of the firstborn. That's really hard for me to rationalize and make sense of, and that's why I was tempted to skip it, but that's not good biblical exegesis. You can't just skip the hard stuff. I ended up calling a friend of mine who is a Messianic Jew and a theologian, so he's a Christian Jew. He was Jewish and converted to Christianity. He's a theologian, and I asked him, I said, how did you learn this passage when you were a kid? How did you hear this text? How is the moment of Passover explained? Like, this is the moment of Passover, right? Passover is commemorating this really brutal moment in the story of God. So how did you hear that? How was that explained to you and your people? And the way he described how he taught and has heard this text is that it's a brutal moment of God working for good to overcome evil. And when you think about the story of the Israelites, if we think about this moment in the text, the Israelites had been enslaved at this point for over 400 years. We know that they had faced physical persecution, they had faced abuse, and in fact, if you remember how Moses even showed up on the scene, it was a rafting trip that he went on in a basket down the Nile River, and that wasn't just for fun. It was because he was attempting to, or his mother was attempting for him to escape the genocide that Pharaoh had set out on Hebrew boys. So I don't know that fully explains the text, but it gives me some context. And I think when we hear this, the story that's being told by this is that the presence of God is a defender of good against evil. The third time in the story when we see theophany or the presence of God occurs through the pillar of cloud and fire, and this is right before the crossing of the Red Sea. Exodus 13:21 through 22 says, "By the day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud and to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people." So again, we see God showing up in a physical way in the cloud or in the pillar of fire for very intentional and specific reasons to be with his people. We also see the presence of God later in the story, this time on Mount Sinai. Exodus 19:9 through 11. The Lord said to Moses, "I'm going to come to you in a dense cloud so that the people will hear me speaking with you and will always put their trust in you." Then Moses told the Lord what the people had said. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and be ready by the third day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all of the people." So again, God is showing up physically this time in a cloud, and in this particular passage, this is where God lays out the Ten Commandments. It's where we see the law. And so this moment of theophany is God really kind of crafting the way of life for moving forward for the nation of Israel. The last place in the Exodus story that we see the actual presence of God as described by the text occurs in Exodus 40 in the tabernacle. Read this text. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And all the travels of the Israelites, whenever the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle, they would set out. But if the cloud did not lift, they did not set out until the day it lifted. So the cloud of the Lord was over the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud by night, in the sight of all the Israelites during all of their travels. This is the last moment of theophany that we see in the Exodus story, and it is essentially the presence of God choosing to dwell forever with the people. First in the tabernacle, later in the story in the temple, but this is God being with them, being present with them. And this moment precedes what is to happen next. It leads us to this question of what path are they on? Where are the Israelites going? Why are they on this journey anyway? And if you'll remember back to the origin of this, God is leading the Israelites out of captivity to the promised land, the land of milk and honey. And this leads us to what I think might be one of the most misunderstood concepts or aspects of the Exodus story, and that's the promised land. In preparation for the sermon, I asked ChatGPT to draw a picture for me of the promised land. And this is what it came up with. This is the promised land according to ChatGPT. It's beautiful, right? We've got this lush green valley, some mountains in the distance, this stream running through it. It's stunning. It's absolutely beautiful. And often in our minds, when we talk about the promised land, I think this is what we think of, right? This is a land flowing with milk and honey, the way the text says. But do you know what's missing in this image of the promised land? There are no giants in this image. The Bible tells us the land was occupied by giants. This image doesn't capture the at least 13 recorded battles that occurred while in the promised land within the text of Scripture, and the untold number of Israelites who were killed during those battles or died throughout the course of the Exodus. Something we don't often remember, that Israelites did die on this journey. Our common understanding of the promised land is prettier than the reality. And I think it's a reminder that the promised land is not heaven. The promised land is the path that God had laid out for the people of Israel on earth, but it was not heaven. I asked ChatGPT to create a modern version of the promised land. This is what it came up with. This is a modern promised land according to ChatGPT. It's beautiful, right? We got this white farmhouse, strong American flag blowing in the wind. I feel like maybe a Texan ChatGPT person made this because the flag is so big percentage-wise, right? Sometimes this is like our image of the promised land. This is the American dream. This is the life that we desire and think that maybe God has planned for us if we are diligent and follow Him. But what's missing in this image of the promised land is death, terminal illness, job loss. It's missing the moment that my dad died unexpectedly. It's missing the moments of your struggle and challenges you've faced. It's missing moments of floods in this image. The story of God leading the Israelites out of persecution, slavery, and the Exodus is not that He's leading them into a heaven on earth, but instead that He would be present with them in the midst of whatever was on the path. Where have you seen cairns of God's presence in your life? These moments of theophany where maybe God has shown up for you in a challenge or a moment of adversity through a friend or through the gift of community, maybe through an experience or service that you've been here or had here at Westover. It's my belief that God is present with us, even in those moments we can't explain. I think about sitting with my dad at the hospital, And I didn't want what was about to play out. I didn't understand it. My knowledge, if we refer back to that Proverbs text, my knowledge was empty. I had nothing left. I had no way of understanding that. And many of us, over this past week, as we think about the flooding, it's really hard for us to understand where God is in this. And I don't have an answer for that, but I do think that one of the things that Proverbs tells us is that if we're trying to lean on our own understanding, we might come up empty. Might not be a lot there for us. But instead, if we dwell in the presence of God, if we are with God, our response will be clear to us. You will know what to do. And I imagine there have been moments in your life where you faced challenge or adversity and you couldn't see a year from now, but you knew what you needed to do then. And so for you, that might look like loving and serving your family. It might look like spending time in prayer. It might look like taking a walk. Maybe that's as far as you can see to the next cairn in your moment of adversity. But the message of Proverbs 3 and the message of Exodus and these moments of theophany is that even when we can't see the way, God is present with us. Let's pray. God, we do not have the ability to understand or comprehend all that is at play in our world. I think of the birth of my baby, and I know many in this room have had children, and the miracle that is happening, I can't even comprehend how this little being came into existence. It's also really hard for me to comprehend the bad stuff. The hard moments, the loss of loved ones, the loss of innocent lives. But God, it is my hope and prayer and belief that even in those moments when I can't explain it, my logic fails me, my degrees or theology or whatever it is that I think I can stand on, when those things fail, it's still my belief that you are present with me and that in some way I'll have clarity for the moment. I ask your blessing over everyone in this room that you would show up for them, that they would be able to reflect back on moments when you have been there for them. It's your name we pray. Amen.